I never really knew why I loved city builders so much. It's just one of those genres that simply can't be turned off when started. Once you get hooked, there's no coming back. Maybe it's the feeling of satisfaction that I get while looking at my nicely organized creation that prevailed many challenges that the game threw at me. If you're a fan like me, then you're probably familiar with these types of games. You know what I mean. Banished, Anno, Tropico series, the list goes on. While those are excellent, today I want to talk about something different, something more stressful and million times more depressing. Oh yeah, it's Frostpunk. Released in 2018 by 11-bit studios, it tells a depressing story of humanity's fight for survival. Frostpunk takes place in alternative steampunk 19th century. Due to many events like dimming of the sun and volcanic eruptions, the world is hit with global cooling of apocalyptic proportions, freezing everything and bringing on the eternal winter. Mass starvation forces the few survivors to travel for a coal-rich north. They use massive vehicles called the dreadnoughts to cross the frozen oceans. There they must find a way to survive by living near giant heating generators. Built before the Great Frost by the British Empire, these generators play an important role in game setting. Always standing in the center of your town, they represent more than just means to survive, but also give that last fraction of hope still left on this planet. When a game with this kind of a setting is developed by the same guys who made This War of Mine, you know we are in for a ride. But where to start? Why not with the visuals? Frostpunk is a really pretty game. Despite snow being the main visual aspect, the overall presentation never feels boring. People walking on snow make paths, and if no one is using the said path for too long, the snow just piles on again. Cold houses also have snow on them, but if you put a heat source nearby, it melts it away. Everything feels so interactive, it's just fun to look at. Splash art for buildings and events is excellent. Any one of these could be taken and used as wallpaper. The cutscenes are done using still images, and I have no problem with this. Like I said, the images are drawn amazingly, and in my opinion it fits the theme that the game is trying to set. The entire premise is considered steampunk, but not in an exaggerated way. Sure, there are giant steam-powered robots, but I think that all of technology fits in the game setting perfectly. Buildings look normal and don't have unnecessary pipes and valves on every side. People don't wear funny hats or wear metal gloves. For the most part, everything looks normal. What I mean is that steampunk is done in a way that actually feels realistic. Nothing seems too extreme or out of place. You just have to look at it for some time to understand what I'm saying. It's also one of the excellent examples on how to do good lighting. Contrast between light and shadow is superb. It's easy to figure out what time it is by simply looking at the light's position, while at night the monolithic generator looks strangely ominous. Many times I caught myself just staring at the screen. It's one of those games that makes you appreciate the large and tumultuous city that you have built from nothing. You see your workers go to work and various buildings moving. It all feels rewarding, but the gloominess of the story is still very much present. In the same regard, I have nothing but a praise for audio as well. It complements the visuals perfectly. First, I want to start with the soundtrack, since this is one of the strongest aspects of the game in my opinion. Most of the tracks are calm and depressing. Visuals on their own are amazing, but you can't feel the true horror of the game's premise without the music. Nothing is better than a chilling track playing in the background while you build your city, constantly reminding you of the dread that is Frostpunk's world.
Listen everyone, new law is signed.
That isn't to say that there aren't any pumped pieces in the soundtrack. There are, but they come in the most intense situations and you will no doubt take notice of them. I don't usually download the entire soundtrack of the game for the sole purpose of adding it to my playlist, but Frostpunk is an exception. It's amazing and I'm sure you will agree. So what about the rest of the audio? Well, for start, there is very little voice acting. Most of it is in intro cutscenes and what is here is done quite good.
We roam the still, cold world. No horizon in sight. The rulers of old, stripped of pride and glory.
Outside of that, there isn't much to say. The rest is mostly buildings or generator working sounds, people letting you know they're upset and so on. Everything is clean and you figure out what is going on quite easily. Like that moment when it gets really cold. Audio sounds are nice and polished, but it isn't something you will notice that much since you will mostly pay attention to already mentioned amazing soundtrack. No complaints here, everything is nicely packaged. When it comes to the topic of how to play Frostpunk, well, there are two options. You can either choose to play one of Frostpunk's 6 scenarios, which are story-oriented playthroughs with set goals and objectives. 3 of those scenarios are DLC, and each of them have their own unique story and objectives. Since all of them are scripted, that means there are predetermined events that mostly come in form of different challenges for a player to overcome. overcome. Next to scenarios, you can play endless mode. As the name suggests, it's a mode without any story and is meant to be played forever in an endless cycle, or at least as much as you can survive. I was never really a big fan of this mode. I always thought that Frostpunk's story is one of the main drives for the game's progress, even if you know what is going to happen, so to throw that away kinda loses a bit of the charm for me, but it is still a good addition to the game if gameplay is the only thing that interests you. Speaking of the story, why don't we start with that by taking a look at Frostpunk's very first scenario, New Home. The scenario puts you in the role of the captain in a newly colonized city. You and your people came from London to this generator in hopes of survival. It is up to you to do what is necessary to build, as the game implies, the last city on Earth. This is the basic premise that you are first introduced to. The more the game goes on, the more information you will receive about the world's history. First and foremost, how did the world get into this sorry mess? Many events like dimming of the sun and volcanic eruption made Frostpunk's world such as it is. Next to that, you will also learn of many struggles and unrest that humanity endured in the wake of this frozen hell. It is very similar to the last game that was made by the same studio, this war of mine, like I mentioned in the beginning. Anyone who played it will know exactly what I'm talking about. Like there, information of the game's lore isn't narrated or even fully explored. It will come in bits and pieces if you even bother to read it, so most of the story is still left to speculation, but the most important part of the story is focused on here and now, survival and progress. And how does one survive in this desolated wasteland? First couple of minutes are quite straightforward. Collect coal, wood and iron from the starting resource piles. Eventually they will deplete, so that requires you to find new sources for collecting materials. Coal is an essential resource and is not just a commodity since you are playing a game called Frostpunk. Temperature meter that you can see at top will constantly go down. Eventually it will reach ridiculously low numbers. Cold is probably your worst enemy here, so you must combat it in any way you can. The giant generators that I have talked about earlier are used just for that. You use coal to keep them running and in return it gives you the heat to survive. When generator is active, it emits a heat zone in which you want to keep your people. Specifically, you would want to build living quarters in these zones, but workplaces need to be heated too. There are other ways to keep the temperature up, such as heaters or steam hubs. Steam hubs are smaller versions of the generator with their own smaller heat zones. Clearly you can't fit everyone in these zones at once, so you'll have to make sacrifices. It's always a constant struggle, placing workplaces with less importance in more dangerous positions while keeping essential buildings functional should be your primary concern. On top of that, you also need to keep an eye on your coal production since consumption of it can get ridiculously high as the game progresses. But what about other two resources I mentioned? Well, wood and iron are your basic building resources. Like in every other city builder, your first priority should be food and shelter. Building tents and hunter huts is a good start. After that, you should consider making sawmills and iron mines. Organized working structure will get you a long way. Working in the freezing cold will eventually get your people sick, so you might consider building an infirmary. This part is pretty standard, so you get the gist of it pretty soon. There is also one more resource that is called steam core. They are essentially used for more advanced buildings. They cannot be crafted, but instead need to be discovered if you want more. They can also be used for building automations, but more on them later. There are just so many buildings, so going through each and every one of them would be insane, but also ruining the part of the fun by spoiling it. So I won't stay on this topic for too long, but there are a few more important things to say. Specifically, the workshops. They act as something of a research center. As you might guess, it's used for getting new buildings and upgrades, most notably upgrades for the generator. It can create huge bonuses and give you an upper hand in tough situations. You basically want your workshops to run all the time. The huge advantage they give is not something you can miss out, and also you are playing on borrowed time. Other special buildings like the beacon are used for scouting nearby areas. With scouting you can encounter different events, and based on your choice it can go very bad or very good. If you get the latter, the event might give you some help in form of more resources or more people. This part is crucial since this way you can get more resources and, most of all, more survivors for your city's workforce. After all, more hands equals better productivity, but also higher consumption, which is also something that needs to be kept in mind. What is the point of more iron if people will die of hunger? When it comes to your workforce, there are a few things to keep in mind. Most notably, not everyone can do just any job. What I mean by that is there are two kinds of citizens, engineers and workers. All of your citizens work in shifts from 8 to 6, after which they go home to rest and eat. Engineers are educated bunch and they are the only ones who can work in buildings like hospitals and workshops, while workers are bigger in number and are best used as hunters or in one of many industry buildings such as iron mines or sawmills. Naturally, you will always have shortage of workforce you can use, so balancing your resource production for a specific situation is a key to survival. Focusing too much on food and coal will deprive you of much needed building materials for warm homes and buildings used for progression, while doing the opposite will certainly mean death and and eventually game over. If you ran into a problem balancing everything, don't worry, the game has a certain mechanic that you will find useful. There is a gameplay mechanic called the Book of Laws that allows you to enact certain laws to help you get an upper hand in bad situations. For example, if you don't have enough people to cover all the workplaces, you can pass the law that makes children help with the work. You need a technology that workshop can finish in one day. There is a law that forces people to work 24-hour shift. Clearly this won't sit right with everyone since people don't like inhumane conditions, and this is where those two bars come in, hope and discontent. As you can guess, hope is considered good and you want it up as much as possible, while discontent is bad and you always want to get rid of it. If hope reaches zero or if this content bar fills up, the people will give you an ultimatum that you must complete or it's game over. Hope and discontent can rise and fall depending on your choices as a leader. How is this important? Well, if people eat food that has sawdust in it every day, while children are dying in iron mines to meet quotas, people won't be too happy about this. I mean, does survival even matter at this point? Deciding what is necessary and what is right is important, but also completely up to you. So make sure you don't focus on only one, since that guarantees a failure one way or the other. Now that essentials are figured out, let's continue with scenario. As you already figured it out, the very moment you start the game, it is good to start collecting everything you see. After that, power up the generator and build a few houses. Open up infirmary and other essentials. When the basic infrastructure is set up, you start to play around with the workshop. This is the first time you can lay your eyes on the possibilities that await you. One of the first technologies that you must unlock is the ability to build a beacon. As said before, it allows you to explore other areas of the map. Sending a scout team to an undiscovered location reveals an event that can have multiple outcomes. For example, early on you can encounter a group of survivors fighting bears. You can help them at the risk of your own scouts, which can result in either them joining your city or your scouts getting killed. Not all events have decisions to make, but many of them do. There is another early event that has you deciding what to do with automation that you found. You can either dismember it for resources or send it back to the city. Automations are highly useful. I mentioned them before, but here is what they do. First and foremost, there are huge steel robots powered by steam. They can replace your workforce by doing their job in one of the buildings. They don't work in shifts like normal people. They work 24 hours, but most importantly they are indifferent to cold, and this is quite a bonus. Not needing to heat some of the workplaces by putting automations to work in them is huge, since now you can focus on taking care of living, breathing people. The downside is that you need a steam core to build one, and they work at 20% less efficiency than your regular workers. They give a massive boost to your survival, so you want them as much as possible in the late game. But for now, let's go back to the scenario. You found out there is another city close to you called Winterhome, so naturally you want to investigate. As your scouts get closer and closer, not everything seems right. The steel bridge that connects you to Winterhome is abandoned, as well as the weather station after it. You would think that everyone moved to the city for some reason, but you are not sure why. As you get closer to the city, you eventually find out the grisly truth. The city has fallen, and now the dead and city's crumbles is all that remains. Right after this unsettling reveal, you get first major event, We Are Alone. After your people get the news on Winterhome's fate, major social unrest follows. What that means is people no longer believe that this expedition will survive, and are pushing the idea that everyone should go back to London where they came from. Thus, some of them will join the Londoneer movement, who want to do just that. The game will always show you how large this movement is, and their number can rise or fall depending on hope. From now on, you have a limited time to convince everyone to stay, or you can lose quite a large part of your population. In face of these challenges, you must find a new cause for people to fight for. Mere survival is no longer enough, apparently. The event now can present you with two choices: order and discipline, or faith and spiritual strength. Each of these paths will determine your unique vision of the future that will be set in motion until the end of the playthrough. Your choice sets the path from which there is no coming back. To show you how exactly each choice has an impact on the game, I would like to take a look at order and discipline as the first example. After you made your mind, you start the idea that through unity and order the survival can be achieved. Clearly not everyone is moved by this at first, and this is where the next part comes in. The event gives you new laws that can be enacted, and they are specifically focused on the selected path. The very first law that can be enacted is Neighborhood Watch. After selecting it, it will branch out to many different laws that can be used later. With this first law, you can build watchtowers and enlist people to work in them to keep your citizens safe. By doing this, you will have people patrol the streets to help anyone who might be in trouble. The more houses you have near these watchtowers, the more hope you will receive. The point is to show everyone that there is a future here, and if everyone stands united, we can avoid the fate that befell Winterhome. As you progress, Londoneers will try to sabotage you since they believe this is a suicide mission. They do this by sending their message with vandalism, graffitis, or any other way to stay relevant. To combat this, it is always good to get more laws, introduce patrols, get better watchtowers, stuff like that. The rules that you can put in motion not only impact Hope and Londoners, but also workplaces. To help with work efficiency, you can place foremen to oversee the workers. Many things like that give a really nice touch to the game. Everything just seems so real. In the beginning of enforcing order, you get a real feeling of doing something good. How the misguided populace will be eventually brought to understanding. From complete chaos, you start to slowly organize. Things like morning gatherings and patrols saving children in danger give people hope. It feels real nice to be a great captain to your people. But as you enact more and more laws, things start to get strange. After all the good things that you have done until this point, now all of a sudden you can build something called a propaganda center. Then you can place loudspeakers to remind people how important their work is. Come to think of it, even the city itself is starting to have a strange totalitarian look to it. Wait, what is this? A pledge of loyalty? People make mistakes, but we can give them a chance to redeem themselves if they agree to cooperate. Oh, I see where this is going. Like every notion or cause, agendas can change monstrably over time. I'm afraid this is no different. Keep in mind that you don't need to force these laws all the way if you don't want to. If you can keep your people in check with minimal enforcement, there is no need for such drastic measures. But if you can't, you can push it all the way. The very last law that can be passed is called New Order, and it is borderline depressing. Any doubters will be treated as traitors and thus swept aside. After this, hope will never again be a problem. You are completely in charge now. As you can see, if you push order and discipline too much, you will lose the sight of why you started uniting people in the first place. And of course, everything you do on this topic will eventually have great impact on the ending. But the question still remains, is a totalitarian nightmare justified for survival? I don't know, but in the end it doesn't matter. Even if the game disagrees with you, the choice should be yours. The other path I mentioned, faith and spiritual healing, has some different moments and effects, but generally the entire experience feels the same. You start by building churches and having evening prayers to get people interested. Eventually you can build a cathedral and get even more influence. To fight Londoners' sabotage, you must enact faith keepers, which is something of a religious police. There are many other unique laws for you to play with. Right before the last one, you can choose to be proclaimed as a protector of the truth, basically the voice of God. The new action that you get with this, the captain's words, gives a massive hope boost, like it's ridiculous. And the last law, called New Faith, creates another sort of dystopia, and I'm sure you can guess what it is. So here we are, the structure of gameplay is covered. I don't want to talk more about this scenario. Simply put, I don't want to spoil the entire story. In all honesty, I already said too much. I want the other scenarios to get the same treatment. I will give you the basic gist of the story, and the rest of exploration is left to you, if you want to try it out, of course. Figure out stuff on your own is part of the fun, so enough talking. Time for the second scenario, the Arks. This one is focused on engineers that are selected to safeguard the precious seeds. As the first screen implies, if the winter ever ends, humanity will need them if it ever hopes to rebuild their lost world. So seeds' survival is just as important as yours. They are put in these buildings called the seeding arks. Seeds are ruined if kept in low temperatures for too long, so keeping them warm has the same priority as getting food. It is easier said than done since they are built so far from each other. The only way to keep them effectively warm is by building multiple steam hubs, I'm afraid. This will be a drain for your coal, but there is no other way. The other part of gameplay is to make as much automations as possible so they do all the work, while you focus on essentials. For this, you will need to find more steam cores by exploring other areas. You will always be in huge deficit if you don't do as much exploring as possible. The whole idea is quite interesting since it makes you think differently from what you are used to by this point. Warming workplaces is no longer necessary since automations don't need heat, but don't think that because of this scenario is easy. There are many other problems that need consideration. First and foremost, how to get food. In the first scenario, only workers could be hunters. Since now you only have engineers, you could probably guess how that presents a problem. There is a farm that you can build where engineers can work to get food, but you need to research it and have a steam core. Time is running out, so you better hurry. Of course, such is the way of Frostpunk, there is another challenge awaiting you later on. The whole scenario does not add much to the experience, but it is quite fun and well thought out. Definitely recommended. The refugees is the third scenario. From the name alone, you can already guess that it is polar opposite of the last one in the terms of gameplay. Instead of organizing limited amount of people, here you have a constant flow of refugees. The plot is that the commoners rose up up and took the ship meant to carry the wealthy and used it to cross the ocean. In the north, they found the generator and claimed it for themselves. As the first group to reach it, it is up to you to prepare the infrastructure for the wave of people coming your way. The sheer amount of refugees can cripple your city if you don't get prepared. Food should be your number one priority, but housing is also something that you can't overlook. Managing the needs of everyone can get overwhelming, but you have so much workforce that it is not that hard to avoid disaster. Next to constant waves of people that are on their way to the city, you will also need to send rescue parties for lost strugglers. Once everyone is safe in the city, the second challenge appears as always. You notice a new group of people heading your way. It is the nobles that left your people to die. Now, that's an interesting twist. How you deal with this upcoming social struggle will determine the ending of this scenario. Will you refuse them and leave them to their fate, or let them in and begin a difficult process of integration? You will face many social struggles and class conflicts, but if you make the right choices, you can end this problem once and for all. Everything about this story is so wholesome. It feels like people struggle with not just the cruel state of the world, but also with each other. There's nothing new or special in terms of gameplay, but I like this scenario. Definitely give it a try. And that's all scenarios that came with the original game. From now on, all the scenarios are DLCs, and the first one was actually completely free when it came out.
Know that we were here. We did our best. We, the survivors, doomed by our own mistakes.
From wholesome to completely stressful, we continue with the fourth scenario, Fall of Winterhome. The plot of this one is quite interesting. It takes place in the fallen city that you have encountered in the main story. The people have risen against their captain who turned dictator. He abused his power and didn't address the problems with the generator that have been made known. In the struggle, most of the city has been reduced to rubble. You are now made the new leader and it's time to clean the city from the debris and fix the generator. First part of this scenario is quite troublesome. Since this is a remnants of a city, most of the structures are ruins and the buildings that are functional are built in unorderly fashion. What I mean by this is there are quite a few houses left outside of the heat zones. There isn't even enough buildings to cover all the necessary needs. Everything is just a mess. All your people should first be assigned to clear all the rubble left from the struggle. By doing this, you can free up some space in the process and save the survivors trapped under the rubble. While all of this is happening, you still need to manage all the needs your citizens require. Eventually, you will rescue all the survivors, clear the space and get the functional infrastructure. After this, it's time to find the cause of the generator's malfunction. You do this by building a repair station around it. This building can take a maximum of 60 engineers. Oh yeah, by the way, didn't mention that there are not that many engineers in this scenario, so maintaining this beast of a station is a bit of a problem, especially when you think about that you will also need them in hospitals and workshops. You could get more if you take them from the weather stations, but that means no more temperature predictions. It's a delicate balance that you have to keep. But back to the topic. After you take all the engineers that you can spare, they begin the investigation on the generator's problems. Unfortunately, after some time you will find out that the damage is irreparable. Repair station can fix the incoming malfunctions, but they will pile on as the time goes by, and in the end, the overwhelming stress will make the generator explode. You are clearly presented with a problem now. There is no hope for the city that doesn't have source of warmth, so evacuation is the only answer. But evacuation where? Now you have a choice of either lying to your people that you know of another city so they keep their spirits up, or tell them the truth and lose 10% of work efficiency. If you choose to lie, there can be a massive problem along the way, but for now it is time to get these people out of here. Building evacuation center will provide you with a train that will get people back to the dreadnought that brought them to this city. But that is easier said than done. To send people there, you need to make sure you can provide them with space and supplies. So before you can send people, you need a certain criteria of metal, steam cores and food that can sustain them. And when I say metal, I mean shit ton of it. Your iron mines will basically work non-stop. Also, you might as well put some sawdust in food to get more rations, since that is also something that might be an issue. As more and more people leave the city, you start to realize that resource production is entering a steady down spiral. The lack of workforce that is still left in the city is making its presence known. While all of this is in play, the temperature is still dropping and the infrastructure in town still has to be maintained for the people still working there. Not to mention the incoming malfunctions that will completely shut down the generator until repaired by the handful of the engineers still left in the city. It doesn't help that people will get furious every time this happens and will nag you to fix the situation as if the whole thing is my fucking fault. As the time goes by, it will be harder and harder to keep everything running at even a basic level. The generator, the dreadnought, the supplies, it is without doubt one of the most stressful experiences I've had in a video game. And I mean that in a good way. The whole scenario is made by a pure genius. This whole situation forces you to experiment. I happily acknowledge the sad reality that has befallen me. On your first run, you will eventually lose track of what is going on, and the completely unexpected malfunction will blow up your generator, killing everyone still left in town. The ending does not give you an answer to what happened to the survivors. They enter the white void and the rest is unknown. Once you play scenario the second time, it is not much of a hassle. Once you know what is going to happen, it is easier to prepare. The main point still stands that this scenario is kick-ass. There is just so many subtle details that make it such a good experience. You can find out how much of a deviant the last captain was by simply looking at the laws that he made. You can also see how little of a shit he gave if you look at the complete disaster that is the city's layout. It's little things like that make it my favorite scenario of all of them. God, how do we top this?
But now, it feels like the weather is changing. And the winter seems inevitable.
Last Anthem is actually a prequel to the main story of Frostpunk. Looking at it like this, it seems like a completely different game. It changes game's core mechanics so much it's unreal. It also gives more information on game's history and view on how people behaved in the wake of the catastrophe that is Frostpunk's premise. The plot puts you in command on one of the generator building sites. The main goal is to build a generator as best as you can so that people who come here can have a better chance of survival when the winter hits. Since you're basically a construction manager, conducting people is a little bit different now. Most of the base resources like wood and steel you will be getting through ports, but there is more. Steel and wood will mostly be used in many factories that produce new unique resources for generator parts. These resources come in form of structural profiles, steel composites and steam exchangers. All of them will be necessary in different building phases of the generator, so you need to make sure you will always have enough of them. Speaking of the generator, let's talk about that. You start building it from its very base, then you build the interior and finally in the end covering it all with a huge thermal hull. You also need to keep in mind that there is a deadline. So yeah, there is a time limit, but don't let that dishearten you, since I think that games give you plenty of time. Also, these generator sites require crazy amount of workers, so be prepared to make massive slums outside of the construction zone. Oh yeah, the workers, you also get them differently now. Early on your playthrough you will build something called a telegraph station. Here you can order how many workers, engineers or steam cores you need. There is a limit of course, so deciding what is most needed for a specific situation is up to you. Engineers are still the same, they only work in hospitals, workshops and so on. I want to emphasize that Workshop has completely new technologies to discover. All of them complement the new setting. For now, most of them are focused on getting new factories, making them work better and so on. Keep in mind that while all of this is in effect, you still need to do the exploration, mainly for food, since that is the only thing you have to manage on your own. You can build a fishing hut, but that is not nearly enough. You can also explore the other construction sites and see how they are doing, but you can already imagine how well they are doing. Now while watching this, you can probably see something different about these two bars. That's why hope is now replaced with motivation, since this is no longer about survival but rather organizing construction jobs. If you can keep motivation high, people will work better, and if it is too low, they are gonna slack. Laws are completely changed as well. Like before, there are two types of laws. The first ones are administrative, focused on how to run this entire operation. Primary goal here is to keep your people motivated, but to a point that it doesn't become an inconvenience. What I mean by this is that you can make them have comfortable quarters, but that reduces the amount of people you can have in a single house. Brothels can raise motivation but also spread STDs, and you can also motivate your people by giving them cocaine pills with their food. This, of course, can cause an overdose and death. Fine balance was always one of the key points in Frostpunk, so this is nothing strange. The other kind of laws are called labor laws. This part would normally be reserved for order and discipline or faith, depending on which one you have chosen. But now, these laws are focused on work efficiency, but also workspace safety. Oh yeah, workspace safety, a completely new mechanic that focuses on how you handle construction sites. If an accident happens and workspace was not safe, then you are in for trouble. There's also some sort of toxic gas coming from the hole in the center of the construction site that makes it all that much harder to make safe work environment. It was clearly put in here so that when you need to finish more dangerous part of the generator, you can't just pump workers and make them speedrun the project. You combat this by introducing many precautions that generally make workers less efficient but workspaces more safe, like safety procedures and equipment maintenance. Next to safety, you can also extend shifts to hurry up the construction. Make sure that you don't push your workers too hard, because that can result in a strike, another new mechanic. If your workers constantly work in dangerous environments while in awful conditions, they can go on a strike. The building that is marked with a strike will not work as long as you don't negotiate solution with the striking workers. When this happens for the first time, player will have an option on how to proceed. To resolve future strikes, you can either support the workers and collaborate with them, or work with the engineers and let them help you get the full control of the project. Each choice unlocks unique sets of labor laws that are set in place until the end of the playthrough. If you choose to support the workers, you will build a labor union and work side by side with them. With this, you can resolve strikes and even regulate workplace safety. There are good bonuses to have here. This isn't necessarily the more moral option, since the workers will eventually start to oppress the engineers to a point of murdering them. Yeah, it's that bad. Also, they will want to vote a representative to speak for them, but you can rig the elections. No matter how much control the workers have, all the important stuff is still left up to you. On the other hand, if you choose engineers, they will help you in overseeing the workers and strikes will be ended in force. I guess it is structured like a big brother where workers are monitored on their every move, so insubordination can be snuffed out. Later on, you can even employ prisoners from the mainland for super cheap to work. It is quite fun, but there are other challenges with that. And of course, since this is a game called Frostpunk, the old friend will arrive eventually. I don't know what else to say, it's such a good scenario. It's a prime example of how to make a good DLC, introducing a lot of new features while still having the soul of the original game. One more scenario and we are done.
Tempestuous winds brought relics of the past to light, ones that can bring hope for the future. Our assignment was simple: arrive at the site, build a reliable camp, and create a stable chain of supply.
Contrary to The Last Autumn, that serves as a prequel to Frostpunk, On the Edge is continuation of the main story. As a leader of newly established outpost near an old army base, you are tasked to collect the metal and steam cores from an abandoned army warehouse and send them back to New London, and in exchange they provide you with supplies needed for your expedition. Very soon you will construct a telegraph station for communication with New London on how your work goes. The first thing you will notice is there is no generator, but will instead rely on braziers for warmth. The map is very small, there is an army warehouse with infinite metal and steam cores next to you, but other than that, resources are pretty scarce. The few trees in the area are nowhere near enough to complete the scenario, and also there is no way to generate food. As soon as you start collecting and sending resources back to New London, the first trouble arises. The city starts to send smaller rations, citing problems with the production. They also send an ultimatum that they will not send food if the quota is not met. That seems kinda strange and cruel, since now you can't rely on them for food alone, you go in search of other sources. South of you there is a settlement called Hot Springs, and they make their own food from crops. They give you some of it as a gesture of good faith, but when the New London finds out about this, they insist you send the food back to them. Understandably, your people get upset and declare independence. This sets in effect a whole new view on your situation. Without New London's help, you need to find new allies. After all, people don't eat steel. The first order of business is to get in contact with Hot Springs to get a steady supply of food. You do this via telegraph station, same as before, and after some talking you have an agreement. Steel for food. You can also help them improve their infrastructure so their production can be more efficient. Naturally, you need to get in contact with other settlements for other resources you need, namely wood and coal, and in all of this you are still waiting for response from New London. By this point you get what is the main gameplay mechanic. Make a suitable and independent outpost with the help of other groups. It is much more than just trading. Other settlements have all kinds of different requests, and your choices will have an impact on your reputation with them. There is definitely fun to be had here, but the entire scenario is quite underwhelming compared to the other ones. I get what they were trying to do, but I didn't get the feeling that much was added in terms of gameplay or emotional investment. It is worth giving it a try, but don't expect to be blown away. And that's all the scenarios that game has to offer. Like I said before, there is still an endless mode, but there isn't much to say about this. It's just that, Frostpunk without a story made to be played forever. You choose what kind of a map you want and you start playing it. There are completely new areas here not seen before with some of the new mechanics introduced, but the majority of the experience is still Frostpunk we know and love. If you want casual experience, this is it. What else is there to say? It's an amazing game. The apocalyptic premise and steampunk setting is somehow made really relatable. No explosions or high actions, just you and the will to survive. Every few months I came back to replaying it and I'll always get hooked. Even though I already know all the things that are going to happen, it still draws me in. It has that appeal to it that I can't shake off. Gameplay and story are definitely the big part of why I love it so much, but the theme and atmosphere are the real killers for me. Visuals and music play a crucial part in setting up the premise of grim reality and bleak future. I swear, you will feel the cold get to you through the very monitor. If you like this photo mine, then this is worth checking out. It's something different and you can use it to take your mind off this very hot summer. And of course, go for the Game of the Year edition. Frostpunk should be experienced primarily with all the content available. You also get soundtrack, wallpapers and so on. It gets on sale pretty often, so you should definitely hold on until then. Preferably on GOG, since it is cheaper there for some reason. That would be it for this time. Thank you very much for watching and stay safe, stalker.